Amma and Appa. Jaya Jaya Amma, Amma Jaya Jaya. Jaya Jaya Amma, Amma Jaya Jaya. Jaya Jaya Amma, Amma Jaya Jaya. Swaha curlew called in the bog, and the blackbird sang in the willows. The cry of the banshee, the cry of the battle hag was so fierce and penetrating. It cut gaps in mountains. This is the language of John Moriarty. He was a poet, he was a philosopher, storyteller, extraordinary. He died about 20 years ago, around the same time generally that John O'Donoghue died. These two Johns were beloved sons of Ireland. And but before John Moriarty died, he wrote some books and he gave some talks. And a lot of the stories that I tell, Irish stories, come from him. It's always good to credit to people. And by the way, does anybody plan on using that thing there? Is that what you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, to be blessed.
To be blessed.
For safety.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Very good.
Yes.
Okay, we'll do that. Is that what you call a mall?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so don't ever say I don't notice things, because I notice.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, sure. The stories that John told, John Moriarty, at first when I heard them, I thought they were weird, and they are. And then I thought more about it, and I thought they're meaningful, and they are. And then I thought, not only are they weird and meaningful, but they're urgent. They're vital, life and death stories. Okay. The stories that have, and these are ancient stories, by the way, pre-Christian, that have been given to humanity for a reason, and passed down from generation to generation, and changed along the way, evolving like everything does. And I believe more and more that these stories have been given to us from early cultures, not just Irish culture, Celtic culture, but native, and any native culture, really. Are stories, how can I say, that will determine whether or not we make it as a planet, as a people. Okay. They're that important, because there's something in the stories that's meant for us so that we can not only survive as humanity and planet, ecosystem and so on, but also flourish. Okay. So the story I want to share with you tonight, I used to tell this story, and then I realized that I just can't tell it. It's when you hear John Moriarty tell it, you realize that he's the only one, really, that can tell this story. So instead of me trying to tell it to you, I'm going to read a part of it tonight. Okay? And we might get through it, we might not, but at least we'll start it. And so here it comes. This is from the book called Invoking Ireland by John Moriarty. So maybe what I'll do is give you the intro to the story and just the first part of the story, because it's such a good story. It's kind of like an epic. You don't want to do it all in one night. You want to stretch it out over time. You'll realize that's how the ancient stories were told, over many nights, and it was always night, and the stories would go on for days. So this is the introduction. to this book and to the story. So this is the person who's asking the question, and the person says, limiting yourself to a sentence or two, would you say, what is it you are up to here? It's so Irish. Okay. So what are you up to? Question. Because everybody's up to something. And the response comes, well, the endeavor, such as it is, has its source in a question. Okay. So he's going to answer the question with a question. How, working from within our tradition, might we reconstitute ourselves as a people? Isn't that an interesting question? You know, and I think, you know, our conversation over dinner and, you know, how we spoke about perhaps it does matter that you have purpose, a meaning, some tradition, some faith tradition even. And so, what are you up to? The person asks. The person who responds says, the endeavor has its source in a question. How, working from within our tradition, notice, it's a common tradition, might we reconstitute ourselves as a people? And I don't know about you, but what you've been listening to lately, but I've heard things lately meaning the past 10 years, things like, we got to get our country back. You know, we've got to, of course, you know, the conservative movement in the country says we got to make America great again. You know, I think at the heart of that is something very basic and understandable. There's the feeling, the sense that we've lost our way. You know, we've just lost our way. Whether you're conservative, liberal, progressive, radical, or just bored, I think many of us would agree that we seem to be at a time in this country, and even around the world, especially in the West, where we've lost our way. We just don't know the way forward. And so, reconstituting ourselves as a people seems like a good thing. It's like finding our way again. You know? And this time it's even more urgent because of all the existential threats that are around us, whether it's a nuclear threat or a climate crisis. We're talking existential. Life and death for the whole people, the whole planet. So he goes on. The person who asked the question says, well, it had not occurred to me that we need to do such a thing. The person responds, my first story, so it kind of ignores what the person said. I'm about to tell you a story, he's basically saying. You know, sorry you're not thinking and feeling and actually living in this world, but I'll tell you a story, maybe it'll help. My first story presents a struggle between two peoples who have chosen different ways of being in the world. My first story enacts a struggle between two peoples who have chosen two different ways of being in the world. So I just want to underline almost every sentence in this chapter I'm about to read to you, I think is profound and rich, even dense, thick in meaning. And that's why I think reading it and slowly reading it is the best way to go forward. And he uses the word struggle. And it's a word that it's not popular in some circles today. You know, I just want to be happy. I just want to be at peace. I don't want to end. I want to end my struggles. I want to. Well, what John Moriarty is saying, and I think what any good therapist would say, and what ancient philosophy has said, and what all faith traditions say at some point, struggle is what it means to be human. Okay, we struggle, we wrestle, like Jacob wrestling with God. Remember that struggle in the Bible where Jacob wrestles with God sometimes called the angel of God, but then other times God. And remember how Jacob ends that struggle?
Winds up with his hip out of joint.
Yeah, he winds up kind of wounded, but he kind of wins too, but he's wounded. He's a kind of wounded warrior, you know, and it's his hip, it's his thigh, and it's like, oh my. So for the rest of his life, we imagine him limping around. You know. Always a reminder that he struggles. Right? So this story enacts a struggle between two peoples who are choosing radically different ways of being in the world. The first group is called the Fomorians. The Fomorians. And they have chosen to shape nature to suit them. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going in and they're carving out nature. They're doing stuff to nature rather than living with nature in a way that they discern nature wants to be. The other group of people are called the Tua De Danann. Tua in Irish means people. And it's interesting that the Tua De Danann are referred to as people, and they're people of the divinity Danu, who was a goddess. The Fomorians are just called Fomorians. They're not even called people, and you'll see why as the story goes on. They are people, but they've lost something essential in terms of what it means to be a person and people. Surrendering to nature, the Tua De Danann choose to let nature shape them. And then John Moriarty goes on and says, today, speaking of contemporary times, our way now is almost wholly Fomorian. So we are the new Fomorians. So we're the ones that shape nature instead of allowing nature to shape us. And it isn't working. He wrote this book, what's the date here, see? 2005, some time ago. It is not working, he says. Or rather, it has proved to be utterly disastrous. So it is that we go back out over 9 waves, water is referring to, and wiser now we hope, we come back into an alternative experience of ourselves. In a world alternatively experienced. It will make little sense to you until you have read their stories, but I will say it anyway. We experience ourselves alternatively in a world alternatively experienced. Then he uses a term. The term is Olav Fola. Olav Fola. It's an Irish term. Let's see if he explains it. In Olav Fola, we experience ourselves alternatively in a world alternatively experienced. He doesn't explain it, so let me try and do my best. Fola is actually another name for the earth in Irish. In one of the stories I tell, the first Celt encounters a Celtic goddess and says, "What's your name?" And she says, Fola. But she's of the earth. She is the earth. And so Fola refers to the divine earth, basically. The term he uses, Ola, is referring to a kind of teacher, but a teacher who is rooted in nature, who's rooted not just in nature, but in history, in traditions, in stories, poetry, the ancient ways. Okay? So Ola Fola literally means an ancient wise teacher of the earth, or from the earth, however you want to say it. In this Olafola, we experience ourselves alternatively in a world alternatively experienced. And then, in one hand, a beheading block, and in the other, an axe. And then he speaks about, and we'll close with this, won't go much further tonight. He says this: in invoking Ireland, we are seeking to evoke it. When he speaks about Ireland, he's talking about the earth as divine presence. Okay. And for the ancient Celts, pre-Christian, they had their own faith, they had their own understanding, and they respected and revered the earth as divine presence. And they invoked it from time to time. Do you remember in Lord of the Rings, there's this wonderful scene where the she-elf, can't remember her name right now. Anybody remember her name?
Starts with an A.
Yeah, like Arwen, something like that. Yeah. She is being chased by the 7, I think, or 9 wraiths. Right? It's a scary scene. I mean, every time I see it, I get scared. And even though I know they had, and she manages to cross the water, right? And when she reaches the other side of the water, now, she invokes the water. Remember? That's an ancient Celtic practice. They invoke the powers of the earth, and for their own protection, basically. So remember, she speaks in Elvish, right? And so it's like an incantation, a chant, and then the waters start rushing, and suddenly the waters take on the shape of horses, right? And they knock over the wraiths and wash them away, basically. I always thought, boy, those wraiths are pretty wimpy if they could be knocked over by water, not come back right away. Anyway, we won't go there. But you got the idea. She is invoking the power of the earth in the water for her protection. That's very Celtic. In Invoking Ireland, this book, we are seeking to evoke Ireland. In invoking it, we are seeking to call it into being. I'll say it again. In invoking Ireland, we are seeking to call it, to evoke, into being. Because his belief in 2005 was that Ireland had lost its way. Okay. Ireland had become, by 2005, a kind of model of cruel capitalism. They called it the Celtic tiger. And people were buying up houses and they were buying up land, and they were acting like good old, Americans, and having a great time, because prior to that, up until 1999 basically, Ireland was considered a developing country. It was pretty poor. But then suddenly, boom, all this money started coming into Ireland, and people were going crazy, buying stuff up. And then suddenly, as we know, 2008, around there, the whole thing crashed. So this was before the crash, and Moriarty was warning them that you're losing your soul, basically. Okay? You're losing what it means to be human. So he wants to call Ireland into being. And maybe we'll close with that, because I can't help but think again of so many people in this country who, in a sense, want to call the United States into being. They want to invoke and evoke a better way. You know, however you understand that, whether it's conservative or liberal or whatever, there's something, I believe, good at the heart of that, a desire to bring into being the goodness of the people of this country, which is a good thing. Yeah? And, you know, as I was watching the film the other night, I mentioned to you, The Last Castle, you know, it was deeply moving to me, and especially, you know, when these prisoners who were former soldiers began to take on dignity and self-respect, and they resisted the less than kind warden, and they stood up for themselves. It's a beautiful moment, and this general, played by Robert Redford, was the one that led them to this point of profound love, regaining their love for their own country, for their own role as soldiers, basically. It was beautiful, actually. So maybe that's a good place to stop, because he immediately goes into the descriptions of the Fomorians and the descriptions of the Tuatha Dé Danann. So we'll stop there. Any thoughts in response?
I'm not sure I know the meaning of evoke and invoke, how it's different. So that's the question.
You want to look it up for us?
Well, actually, I guess I could.
You could.
Invoke, it says, is to cite or appeal to someone or something as an authority for an action or in support of an argument. That's the first thing. And then there's two more. Call on the deity or spirit in prayer as a witness or for inspiration. And the last one is call earnestly for.
So you know that in many church services, there's something called the invocation.
Oh, yeah.
So you're invoking, basically, the deity, the divine God, to come. And you're calling, vocare, to call. You're calling to God to come. Come in among us. Be present with us. So I think that's how John Moriarty's using it, in the sense of invoking Ireland as the divine earth to return into our consciousness, to return into our practice, so that we relate to Ireland, especially the land, with respect and awe. And that's invoking. But what does evoke mean?
I pulled that up. It says bring or recall to the conscious mind. And then in quotes, the sight of American asters evokes pleasant memories of childhood. Okay. And then it says evoke means, this is the second one, to invoke a spirit or deity. So apparently they are very close in meaning.
What does it mean to call something evocative? Anybody?
Produces action.
Produces action, produces emotion too.
Yeah.
So I think in John's case, John Moriarty,
Okay.
he's using them similarly but differently. To invoke Ireland as the divine earth and all that means, and to evoke our own emotional response, our passion, so that we do something about what we're invoking and we respond to it.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be my take on it. Any other thoughts?
It's just kind of interesting how this very ancient Irish tale is talking exactly about the situation we're dealing with today for humanity. Just like, wow.
How do you see that, Tim?
Well, that in general, we've gone unconscious to nature and to the balance of nature, and we just take what we want any way we want to without even being aware of the consequences in nature. Kind of like the form, God, I forget the word, but and there's just at large no honoring of the value of the world.
Yeah. John Moriarty would tell the story of him going up. He used to be a college professor in Canada, and then he quit, and because he could no longer be in an academic box, he said, he had to go back to Ireland and cut turf, right? And he would say, yep, now I'm back in Ireland, I'm back in the land of Fola, and I go up sometimes, he would say, on the mountain tops, because there were two mountains in Kerry, and an ancient tradition calls them the breasts of Danu, right? And so he sees them as divine, right? The presence of God in the land. He would say, I would always ask permission before I stepped upon the breasts of Danu. Because he had this awe, this respect, that was built into his Irish psyche.
As I think contemplate over the state of America, I think where people are lesser to have that conscious is because there's less nature every day. I've thought about nature as a way of thinking and as a way of feeling and as a pathway of connecting with it. But if there's no nature to connect with, then there's no conscious there. So that's the solution to me, is where it's degraded, it needs to be restored. And then the mind will come with it, and the heart too, to be evoked. And that's for all lands.
And the longer that I live here, the more I feel the trees, the sky, the earth, chickens. Yes, even the chickens. And it's a great source of delight for me. I mean, I loved living in the city when I lived in the city, but this is very different. This feels much more joyful, just waking up in the morning. I mean, you know, you wake up in your little apartment, your little flat, alarm goes off, get your shower, get your breakfast, head out the door, whatever you're doing, you know. That's the way many people live. And not to see a tree on the way to work, not to see, you know, a meadow, a forest even, you know.
Or even a chicken.
Or a chicken, yeah. keep coming back to those chickens. It's just so powerful.
Yeah.
The more I'm here, it's changing me. Yeah. And it's a good thing. The other thing I think is worth mentioning, and he refers the story you're about to hear, starting tomorrow night. The key word in it is struggle, and between two peoples, right, that he says have chosen radically different ways. And I can't help but think, you know, as you mentioned, Tim, that theme is such a contemporary theme.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of it more and more these days, and you guys could help me out here, between the global north and the global south. You know? The people who have polluted the world, mostly, predominantly, tend to be in the global north. You know? Western Europe, United States, Britain, and so on. And the people in the global south, my understanding is that they are experiencing the effects of that even more than we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this emerging struggle about to happen. It's already happening, but it'll become more and more obvious. And it just makes me pause, you know, and to realize that we are in the midst of this Fomorian Tuatha Dé Danann world, and where do we stand? You know? How do we live in this world in a way that loves, honors, respects, even reveres people and land? The story is going to speak to that, and it's going to have some surprising answers. So, we'll close with the song. great love for all peoples everywhere and for this beautiful earth. As fires rage on the west coast and freezing temperatures in the east. Help us to be more and more of one mind with the wind and the rain. May it be so.